Hey everybody, thank you for coming to us here at the Crit House. I'm Jeff Larson, and we are continuing our series of the Crit House Critique Group. And we have just a fantastic group of people who've joined us over the last 6 weeks or so. Ellen Friedlander, who has been a part of the program for a very long time. It's great you've been such a great reviewer for us for a period, and now to be able to have seen your work and to hear your discussion with other folks has been it's been great. Granville Carroll has been a reviewer on the program in the past as well, and it's been wonderful to see his work and hear him talk about things here on the Crit Group. Jenae Lien is I know from her time as a publisher of the These Streets magazine when they came to Boston. And Jenae, it's been great to have you here on the Crit House. Thanks for joining us here for this last episode in this series. Nina Kling, or Welch-Kling, almost got it wrong. She showed us her work last week, which was just amazing, and I hope you have a chance to take a look at that program. But we are finishing this series with Nick Gervin, who I know from his work up in Portland, Maine. We actually haven't met in person yet, Nick, but I have talked to you in other critique circumstances, and I've seen your work for a long time on Instagram. So it is great to have you here, and let's take a look at your project. Nick, tell us about yourself, tell us about the project, and maybe a little bit about what you're hoping to hear from us as a group as reviewers.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here. This has been fun. I enjoyed everybody's work. Great stuff. Yeah, so I'm Nick Gervin, photographer up in Portland, Maine. I'm a disabled photographer. I have been shooting primarily, most of my work takes place around Portland, but this is one of the bodies of work that's I've kind of moved on and have been shooting, throughout New England, I would say, with this. It's in the early stages. I'm calling it American Cemetery for the time being. The big question, the question of the meaning of life. And, death, very interesting. I've had some close experiences with death myself, and I'm very lucky to still be here. And so when I have a camera in my hand, I often say, well, how can I approach this giant question, this giant mystery, something we all have to face? And then I just start making photographs around the main subject, but not necessarily the subject itself. It is a subject that I feel is just as valid to have a conversation about as anything in life, if not maybe more valid. And it's a challenge to photograph. So I guess what I was hoping for this critique was just for us to talk about our own mortality and our own dreams and our own goals, our own thoughts on the subject, and maybe from that I can get some ideas on different ways to approach this body of work. But I also think that the project will be turning into a celebration of life just as much as these mystery questions of what happens afterwards. And so yeah, I'm just interested to see what other people think, and yeah.
Well, that's great, Nick. Thanks. Actually, it was interesting because I didn't quite understand the full breadth of what you were looking to do until you just explained it there, which is interesting because I was thinking more about cemeteries and not necessarily as broadly about death. But that opens it up in a lot of ways. I have to say I am particularly moved by the images that are that are a little more surreal, and you have a series of sort of surreal images that are, I guess it's not surreal, but it's just sort of it has a mood with the snow falling. I assume that's snow that's falling there, and there's something that's serene about this. But that's just my initial reaction. Open it up to the group. What do you think? What can we tell Nick?
I'll be happy to jump in.
Please do.
I think like the kind of lighting and the atmosphere in this photograph is stunning. But and I think this goes really well with the last photographs, and in my mind, what I'm thinking about is like, how do I show death without actually showing a grave or a cross? Like, how can I express it? What other things, you know, and I think this does this amazingly well. But there's something, I mean, really, that gives me goosebumps. It's just such a beautiful image, but it has the same kind of light quality and the branches as the light has in number 8. But so in my mind, I'm thinking, like, how would I show death without showing a grave?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you conceptually, you know, it kind of goes back to yeah, I mean, I don't know. And I mean, it's a hard question. Like, it's easy when you show a cross or a gravestone. Easy. I mean, it's not easy, but it's like, I really do like this image also.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I think, because it doesn't say immediately, you give room to think about it.
I mean, I would say the images that I respond to the most are the ones that are more suggestive and, you know, probably, no surprise, abstract. But like, so like the ones where you have the people sort of around the grave sites, you know, those are nice images, but I don't think I relate to them as much because that feels more like a personal space that I myself don't have access to. But as you know, we're talking and mentioning about like wanting to have this conversation about our own experiences, you know, and as we were flipping through the images, the thing that really came to me was like the fluctuation of emotions dealing with grief, and how intense that can be at times. A good friend of mine who passed away in 2021 from COVID complications, her birthday was just on the 15th. So she would have been like, I don't know, 28. So she died pretty young. And so, you know, dealing with that idea of grief, you know, there's moments where I'm like, okay, yeah, she's gone. I accept it, you know, but then I get really angry and I'm like, why? And then I get really sad. And then, you know, so I can see how a lot of these images are sort of moving through that space, that emotional space of dealing with that. And maybe, you know, like, yeah, it's just it's dealing with those emotions, which I can really relate to in that sense.
Yeah. Sorry for your loss, and she sounded so young. So,
well, thank you.
It's such a challenging topic, and I think we tend to try to steer away from any kind of conversation like this, you know. And I don't know. I mean, Jeff knows my work. I try not to run away from things. I kind of head straight into them, and you know, this is to me is probably the biggest question. And you know, I lots of the photographs some are very personal, and you know, sharing them is it's tough, but at the same time, I don't know. I think that there's something here, and then also looking at it through a cultural kind of approach with the word American attached to it, and seeing. I mean, America is such a melting pot of great people, and there's probably a vast diversity that I've yet to even, you know, try to work in there. And I think that's, you know, where I see the project going is trying to cover more. And yeah, I think that another thing, you know, just speaking from a photographic standpoint, is cemeteries are everywhere. So everywhere you travel, there's a cemetery, and yet they're all different, and they all look different or have like a different vibe to them. And you know, what I found really interesting was during COVID, our cemetery, one of our larger ones here in Portland, became like a recreation center. You know, it was like people picnicking and exercise, walking their dogs, but there was so much activity in the graveyard. It really, and because I was doing this before the pandemic, I saw the activity like increase, and it became a big open space where people felt safe and distant.
Right.
And so that's also interesting to me. I'm really interested in the way that people use space and think of space and stuff like that. So, but I mean, I can see how you guys relate to the more abstract or the more creative stuff, and then there's some more stuff that's very straightforward. my initial idea too was
Yeah.
maybe in the sequencing to have it fall apart. So towards the end, we
Interesting.
hit the images that start to just become nothing. Like
Hmm.
literally, maybe the last image is absolutely, you have no idea what it is. It's just a mess.
So I have a
I
question,
like
Nick.
that.
Number 7.
Mhm.
I thought originally it was like a knife slicing through.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is a sign that's was smashed by vandals, and it looks like someone tried to put it back, but they put it back wrong.
Oh,
And so you know, here we are reading it in this kind of reversed mirror image almost.
Mhm.
and I have another thought. So ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So it could be really interesting to take a photograph or several photographs and just tiny little pieces rephotograph.
Interesting.
Something like, and it might be tombstones. It could be that you build a sculpture out of tombstones, but they don't know you're doing tombstones.
Right.
Wait, so can you clarify that so I understand it better?
Well, I don't know how, like, at first I'm just thinking that you would tear like more like tombstone. So it's like all of one kind of thing. Maybe it's several different photographs of tombstones, and then you just really tear that to bits and you kind of you see how you can make
Mhm.
a photograph out of that, rephotograph that,
Mhm.
and see how that kind of plays into the whole experience of your question about death and feeling, and because we're all molecules at the end,
All bits and pieces. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
bits and pieces.
Yeah. Well, so Nick,
pretty
that's
interesting.
from what I've seen from your work in the past, you're pretty straight with you do books and zines. Is that something you've done before? Is that something you'd be interested in thinking about?
For the final, yeah. Oh yeah. I work strictly I shoot for books. So that's like
Yeah.
my end goal. I just recently had my first monograph come out, but before that I've done some zines and some small self-publishing and stuff like that. So yeah, I think long term, I mean, my Portlanders work, which just came out, was 10 years in the making. And I think long term, definitely, I don't really, I mean, I don't want to say I don't believe in the individual image because I enjoy photographs, but definitely I believe in the collection is a greater way to show images. So, and a book is probably the best form for that.
But I do love the idea of sequencing it, whereas it kind of falls apart, but I almost could see that it starts with a very conceptual, like the darkness image, like we kind of come from nothing and we end up with nothing, and then there's
Yeah.
kind of this arc in between,
Mhm.
which I think could be very interesting, because then you're kind of like, well, what is this? And then you start to understand, but then, you kind of, it becomes more questionable and more questionable. And you start to wonder, what is this all about?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
death is, and grief is kind of hits you in ways that you can never expect it. It's usually things that remind you of the person, and there's no scheduling it. It's something that you see, and all of a sudden it overwhelms you, and how can you express that? Or how, I mean, like, I love the name of the cemetery with the letters falling off. I almost just want to see like the letters falling off, or maybe it's like a close-up that
Yeah.
it's like the falling apart. So
Yeah.
great.
It's like Granville, like your project, I wouldn't say it's the same or anything, but there's something there where you're speaking about the void, and I think that's something I'm kind of barking up, in a very different approach, obviously, but
Yeah, but certainly some crossover for sure.
yeah. You could borrow
yeah, I
two of
mean,
my
it's-
images if you want, the really abstract ones.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll give you some credit.
I would be honored.
I love it.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think this is great. And I love the idea, like what you said, about taking the sequence and breaking that apart. Because I think that's the biggest thing is just the reworking of the images. And of course, I'm sure you have tons more images that
Yeah,
you're
I
working
do.
to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, just seeing how things start to weave together and unfold and unravel. And I mean, I think even what Ellen was talking about, like physically ripping up images, like it made, as she was talking about that, I was thinking, oh, like a phoenix, like a phoenix burns
Right.
to ashes, right? And then it's
Right.
reborn into this thing and this endless cycle. So it's almost like the photo becomes a fractal, which then also becomes like this idea of reincarnation, which starts to factor in
Right.
other cultural ideas of death. And so yeah, I mean, like there's so many ways, and like this is so great, this mirror image.
Yeah.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah.
But that almost got, gets me into that mindset, right, where I'm just sort of spiraling downward, nowhere to go, but just questioning and questioning and questioning.
Yeah.
But
I've
there's
also thought about inquiring like a baptism or something like that, maybe a wedding, some other
That's
thing,
interesting.
but doing it straightforward and abstract, and then seeing what I could pull from that.
That is interesting.
I was also thinking of another way of kind of playing with the idea, is that we kind of think of death as dark, but what if there's one or two photographs that you blow out where you can barely see, so it's just about the light, where it's like the outline of the photo. Like I could see like this one, you could just blow, really overexpose, where it becomes these faint images where you're kind of looking into the light.
I have two like that, Nina.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel that
great.
very much.
Because I was looking at the one with the umbrellas where it feels so concrete, and almost because it is a little on the bright side. So first I'm thinking, oh, would I want this darker? But then I'm thinking, wow, why don't you just make it really light? And it becomes like this, like, where did this person go? And we're still here. And, there's this whole other part to death.
Yeah, this one, it's very atmospheric-y and lighter and washed out. Yeah.
This is a really important point that you brought up, Nina, because my mother and her friends, they're in their 85th, 6th years. They actually are ready to leave. And it's a totally different conversation when you're listening to your mother say, I'm done. I've had enough here. And she's relishing the idea of moving on.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting other dimension to this project. A lot of people fear death, but then there's this other that people want to be able to take death into their own hands. People are celebrating death. So there's a lot you can do with this project.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good thought. My father is amongst them. He is ready to go. Jenae, did you? I've seen you thinking about putting your 2 cents in.
There's just so much, I love all the thoughts that everyone's been talking about in this project. It's so cool because people are afraid to talk about death, and I think it's something that we're all going to experience, but we have no idea what it's like until we're there, and then we have no idea of how to explain that. And so I find it fascinating how you went to a place full of death and you really brought things to life, like the statues. They seem so alive to me, and how the light plays around them, how he's pointing. It's just it's really fascinating. So I wonder then, if you were to go to those baptisms and those weddings, and if you were to find, I don't know, but it might sound weird to say, but like almost moments of death, or like, like the other part of it, like an opposite, not necessarily death, but a closing or an ending of some sort. I feel like death is all about opening and closing up things, and I really see that come to life here, especially in your inanimate objects. And then these crows with the freaky eyes.
The eyes, yeah. I was happy when I got that. When I was surprised when the eyes came out. I was like, oh wow.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
But yeah, you nailed it with the statues. I tried to add movement and to make these statues be these things that are kind of in this transitional state. Like, time is relevant to the individual, and time is also important to us, and it speaks to us, and it says our life story, and it's limitless. It's not limitless. It has an ending to it. And statues are static and stiff and there and permanent, and I tried to use light and moisture and water and all these other things to create motion, and to really just experiment, like really not care what the result is, and to just free myself from restraints as an artist. So
Well, I think you've certainly started on that path, and I know you said at the beginning it's going to be a long-term project.
Yes.
So again, as I've said with most of the project we've talked about, it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes. Nick Gervin, thank you for showing this. Great work. I knew it was going to be good when I brought you on here. Thank you all for participating here on the Crit House, this critique group. It's been fantastic. The last 6 weeks that we've shown this on the Crit House, I think we've shown some amazing work, and it'll be interesting to see where these things go. Thank you for your time, for your energy, for your brilliance, your insight. I think the great thing about this that I'm excited to be able to show is how photographers can talk to photographers about the work and how it can grow and how we can see insight and get from the other people. And some of it we don't listen to, and some of it we take to heart and we take and we run with it. So thank you all for participating, and it's been an honor to spend some time with you. And thank you all
Jeff.
for watching the Crit House.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you.